By the time the last logging truck disappeared around the bend, Laura Bennett barely recognized the back 40 acres of her Missouri farm. For 6 days, chainsaws had ripped through the maple woods her husband once walked every October. He had known those trees by shape and slope, pointing out which ones turned red first and which deer trails crossed the creek before winter. Now he was gone, and so were many of the trees. Laura stood at the edge of the muddy skid trail and told herself not to think about that. She had sold the timber because sentiment did not repair tractors. It did not stop rain from leaking through the equipment shed, and it did not pay property taxes that were due in 6 weeks. 2 years after her husband's death, survival had become a series of decisions she hated making. The forest floor looked wounded. Branches lay tangled over wet leaves. Sawdust clung to the mud. Deep tire ruts cut between fresh stumps. Then Laura noticed the wooden masses scattered among the debris. At first, she thought they were oversized stumps. Then she saw another, and another. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They were ugly things, swollen chunks of maple covered in rough bark, knots, and strange rounded growths. Some were the size of watermelons. Others looked heavy enough to crush the bucket on her old tractor. Laura stopped beside one, nearly 3 feet across. It looked like a tumor growing out of a tree. Rick Holloway, the logging supervisor, was tightening a chain on the back of his truck. "What are these?" He barely looked over. Burls. Laura had never heard the word. They worth anything? Rick laughed. Not to us. He explained that mills wanted straight timber, predictable grain, standard dimensions. These were the opposite. Awkward, heavy, difficult to stack, difficult to saw. Some had been cut away because they interfered with processing. Others came from sections the crew had rejected completely. Laura looked across the clearing. There had to be nearly 200. "You coming back for them?" Rick shook his head. "Costs more in diesel to haul that junk than it's worth." Then he climbed into the truck. "Keep them if you want." Laura watched the convoy disappear. The sentence meant nothing to her then. For the next week, the Burls lay exactly where the crew had abandoned them. Rain filled their cracks. Mud collected around them. Laura barely noticed. Until Saturday afternoon. She was repairing fence beside the county road when an old pickup passed her property. Then its brake lights flashed. The truck stopped, backed up. A gray-haired man stepped out and stared toward the clearing. His entire expression changed. "Ma'am," he called, "are those maple burls?" Laura nodded. The man kept staring. "How many?" "Maybe 200. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he asked the question that made Laura slowly put down her fencing pliers. "Would you sell me one?" Laura studied the stranger. The burl he wanted lay half buried in mud beside the clearing, dark with rain and covered in moss. To her, it still looked like something the logging crew had been too lazy to haul away. "How much?" The man rubbed his chin. $50. Laura almost smiled. $50 for something she had been considering dragging onto a burn pile sounded ridiculous in the best possible way. "Cash?" He nodded, but instead of immediately reaching for his wallet, the man crouched. That changed Laura's mood. He brushed wet leaves from the base, ran his fingers slowly across the bark, measured the widest section. Then he leaned closer and studied several narrow cracks. Laura watched him tap one side with his knuckles, then another. He was not looking at trash. He was inspecting it. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Making sure it's solid." "Why?" "Some rot inside." Laura folded her arms. "And if this one isn't rotten?" The man hesitated. "Then I can use it." "For what?" "I make things." Laura looked at him. "What things?" "Bowls, boxes, furniture sometimes." She glanced at the filthy mass between them. "From that?" The man smiled. "You'd be surprised what's inside." Something tightened in Laura's chest. For 2 years, she had survived by noticing the details other people hoped she would ignore. Invoices, repair estimates, loan terms, late fees. After her husband died, a small mistake could become a $100 problem before she realized it. Now a stranger had spotted a chunk of wood from a moving truck, backed up, and offered money for it. Maybe $50 was generous, or maybe $50 was cheap. Laura stepped between him and the burl. "I think I'll wait." The man blinked. "I can do 75. Laura's suspicion sharpened. "No. 100. Now she almost laughed. You doubled your offer in about 30 seconds. For the first time, the man looked uncomfortable. I'm saving you the trouble of moving it. Laura held his gaze. I've been living with trouble for 2 years. One more piece of wood won't scare me. The man gave a reluctant smile. Then he pulled out a business card. If you change your mind, Earl Dawson Custom Woodturning. Laura watched him drive away. That evening, she sat alone at the kitchen table with her laptop. The house was quiet in the way it had been too quiet since her husband died. She typed, Maple Burl. Photographs filled the screen. Polished bowls worth hundreds. Live edge slabs priced in the thousands. Small blocks of figured maple selling for more than ordinary logs. Laura leaned closer. The finished wood was filled with curls, eyes, waves, and strange swirling patterns. Then she found a photograph of an uncut burl. Her stomach tightened. It looked almost exactly like the ugly masses lying behind her barn. Laura stared through the dark kitchen window toward the woods. She still had no idea what those burls were worth, but she knew something now that she had not known that morning. No one was getting one for $50. By Monday, Laura had looked at so many photographs of maple burl that the clearing no longer looked like a pile of waste. It looked like 200 unanswered questions. That was almost worse. Online prices made no sense. One piece sold for $40. Another, nearly the same size, sold for hundreds. Large slabs sometimes reached thousands, but only if the wood was solid, only if the figure was exceptional, only if it had been cut correctly. Laura realized she could lose money in 2 opposite ways. She could sell something valuable too cheaply, or destroy its value before discovering what she had. Eventually, she pulled Earl Dawson's card from the kitchen drawer. She hated making the call. He had tried to buy that first burl for $50, but he was also the only person she knew who had recognized one at highway speed. Earl answered. You selling? No. Laura paused. I want to know what I own. Silence. Then Earl laughed. Fair enough. That afternoon, Laura wrestled one of the smaller burls into her pickup using the tractor. Even the small one was brutally heavy. Earl's workshop sat behind an old farmhouse 12 miles outside town. Laura stepped inside and stopped. Wooden bowls covered shelves. Rough blanks were stacked under benches. Unfinished vessels surrounded a large lathe. Suddenly, Earl's reaction beside the road made sense. He walked outside and looked into her truck. You picked a decent candidate. How do you know? I don't. Laura frowned. Earl pointed toward the bark. You learn clues. Shape. Density. Cracks. Growth pattern. But the real answer is inside. They rolled the burl onto a heavy bench. Earl cleaned one side and marked a cut. The bandsaw began to hum. Laura watched the blade disappear slowly into the maple. She expected pale, ordinary wood. Then the first section dropped away. Laura forgot to breathe. The grain twisted in every direction. Dark lines curled through honey-colored maple. Hundreds of tiny circular eyes clustered across the surface. Under the shop lights, parts of the wood seemed to move when Earl changed the angle. That was inside there. Earl nodded. He sprayed a thin layer of water across the fresh cut. The pattern exploded. Gold deepened. Dark curls sharpened. Laura touched the edge with one finger. The ugly lump she had almost burned now looked like marble painted by something alive. That's why people buy it, Earl said. He showed her how different craftsmen saw different possibilities in the same material. Bowls, furniture, knife handles, instrument parts, veneer. Then his expression grew serious. Don't hear all that and assume every burl is a jackpot. Some rotted inside. Some contained insects. Some cracked. And a valuable one cut badly could become ordinary wood in minutes. Laura immediately thought about the clearing. Rain had already fallen twice. How long can they stay out there? Earl looked at her burl. If you really have 200? He paused. I'd stop leaving them in wet ground. The excitement vanished from Laura's face. Suddenly she could see the rainwater sitting beneath them, the mud around their bark. Value, she realized, could disappear before she ever touched it. Then Earl pointed toward the opened burl. Oh, this might bring a few hundred to the right person. Laura felt a brief disappointment. But properly cut, properly dried, And sold to people who understand the figure? He looked at her. That's a different question. Laura pictured the clearing again. For 2 years, almost everything on the farm had felt like another responsibility left behind after her husband died. For the first time, something felt different. Not a burden. A possibility. Earl stopped her before she left. One rule. Laura turned. Don't sell another Burl hole until you understand what's inside. Laura returned the next morning with a Burl nearly twice the size of the first. Getting it onto the trailer had taken almost an hour. The tractor hydraulics leaked. Her gloves were soaked in grease. Twice, she nearly quit. But after seeing what had been hidden inside the first Burl, Laura could no longer look at the others the same way. Earl stepped outside. His expression changed when he saw it. That one's more interesting. Laura climbed down. You keep saying things like that without explaining them. Earl smiled. Because this time, before we cut, we decide what we're looking for. Laura had assumed wood was wood. Put it through a saw. Make boards. Sell boards. Burl punished that kind of thinking. Earl showed her how cutting direction could reveal tight eyes, long curls, waves, or chaotic figure, or destroy them. One wrong line could turn exceptional material into average craftwood. That made Laura nervous. For almost 20 minutes they studied the Burl without touching the saw. Finally, Earl marked one line. The blade moved slowly through dense maple. Once, twice. Then the slab separated. Laura froze. Hundreds of tiny eyes spread across golden wood. Dark brown lines twisted between them like ink caught in moving water. Near one edge, the figure folded back on itself in waves. Earl sprayed water across the surface. Laura whispered, "My God." Earl said nothing. That frightened her more than excitement would have. "What?" He ran his hand over the slab. "This is good." "How good?" He looked at her. "Good enough that you shouldn't let me decide what it's worth." Laura stared. "You're the expert. I'm a woodturner. I'm not every buyer." That sentence became the next lesson. A furniture maker might want the widest slab. A turner might want thickness. A veneer buyer might see value where both of them saw waste. There was no single correct price because there was no single correct customer. They made 2 more cuts. Then Earl stopped. Laura expected him to continue. Instead, he sealed the exposed wood. Why stop when we know it's good? Because knowing it's good is exactly why we stop. Fresh burl carried moisture deep inside. Dry it too fast, it cracked. Leave it wet, fungus and insects could ruin it. Handle it carelessly, and value disappeared long before a buyer arrived. Laura took out a notebook. Moisture, thickness, end sealing, airflow, drying. For the first time, she understood why the logging company wanted nothing to do with these pieces. Their business depended on moving hundreds of logs efficiently. These demanded patience, attention, judgment. Everything an industrial sawmill was designed to avoid. Before Laura left, Earl placed the best slab beneath brighter lights. "I know someone in Kansas City." "A buyer?" "Furniture maker. High-end custom work." Laura felt the first real flutter of hope. "You think he'll want it?" Earl lifted his phone. "Let him tell us." He sent several photographs. 20 minutes later, a reply arrived. "Dimensions?" Earl answered. Another message. More photographs? Then another. Finally, Earl turned the screen toward Laura. The craftsman wanted to see the slab in person, but what made Laura's pulse quicken was his last question. "Do you have more?" She looked toward the trailer. 2 weeks ago, 200 ugly pieces of maple had seemed like a cleanup problem. Now, for the first time, someone was asking how many she had. 3 days later, Daniel Mercer drove nearly 2 hours from Kansas City to Laura's farm. He was a custom furniture maker. Laura expected a 10-minute inspection. Daniel spent almost 40. He studied both faces of the slab beneath natural light, measured it, sprayed part of the grain, examined each visible crack. Then he inspected the remaining sections of the burl. "This all came from one?" Laura nodded. "There's still some left." Daniel looked at Earl. "You were smart to stop." Laura nearly laughed. She had not been smart. She had been lucky enough to meet someone who knew when not to cut. Daniel separated 2 slabs and several smaller sections. Then Laura asked the question she had been rehearsing all morning. "What would you pay?" Daniel looked over the pieces. $1,800. Laura waited. For all of it? No, these. He pointed toward the pieces he had selected. The rest stays yours. Laura's mouth went dry. $1,800. Part of one Burl. Her mind immediately went somewhere Daniel could not see. The tractor repair estimate folded inside her desk, the water stains spreading across the equipment shed ceiling, the tax notice on the kitchen counter. For months, Laura had trained herself to think in shortages. What could wait? What could she repair herself? Which bill could survive another week? Now someone was offering $1,800 for wood that had been abandoned in mud. She looked at Earl. He deliberately gave her nothing. No nod, no signal. This decision belonged to her. Deal. Daniel left a deposit. Before leaving, he walked toward the clearing with Laura. When he saw the burls scattered across the mud, his expression changed. How many? Close to 200. Daniel stared. Get them off the ground. Laura had already heard the warning, but now there was $1,800 attached to it. Why? Daniel pointed toward one burl sitting in wet soil. Because today that might be inventory. Then he looked at her. 6 months from now, it might be compost. That afternoon, Laura took a notebook into the clearing. She counted every piece, 193. Some small, some enormous, some visibly cracked, a few already soft, dozens apparently solid. Laura began tagging them. B1, B2, B3. By sunset, she had reached 37. Her back ached. Mud soaked her jeans. One glove had split across the palm. But whenever she thought about stopping, she remembered the check. $1,800. Not from a whole tree. Not even from a whole burl. Part of one. She refused to multiply $1,800 by 193. Earl had warned her against fantasies. Some could be rotten, some worthless. But possibility had entered the farm again, and Laura had almost forgotten what possibility felt like. Near the lower edge of the clearing, she reached an enormous burl nearly 4 feet across. Dense bumps covered the bark. Half of it had sunk into the earth. She scraped away the mud. Hard wood. Laura attached a tag. B38. Then she tried lifting it. The tractor tires spun. The burl barely shifted. Laura shut off the engine. Rain was forecast. Suddenly, the opportunity felt frightening. She might have rare wood worth thousands sitting on her property. But she still had a leaking barn, an old tractor, and only 2 hands. If she could not protect it fast enough, nature would erase the value before she ever discovered what she owned. The rain came early. Laura woke before dawn to water striking the farmhouse roof hard enough to pull her from sleep. By 6:30, muddy streams were running through the lower clearing. She stood at the kitchen window for 3 seconds, then saw the burls. Laura was outside minutes later. Rain ran down her face as she hooked chains to the first piece. There was no possible way to save 193 burls that day, so she stopped trying to think about all 193. Save the best-looking one, then the next, then the next. The large, dense pieces came first. The tractor dragged smaller burls toward the equipment barn, where Laura raised them on scrap lumber to keep wet soil away from the wood. For the heavy ones, she called Tom Keller, her neighbor. Tom arrived with a trailer and winch. He watched Laura fighting a misshapen burl through the mud. "You building a house out of tumors?" Laura laughed despite herself. "That's what I thought they were." Then she told him about Daniel. $1,800? For part of one. Tom stopped smiling. He looked toward the woods. "You got more?" Laura simply pointed. Tom stared, then reached for the winch cable. "Move over." They worked through the afternoon. The burls rolled unpredictably. Chains slipped. Mud swallowed boots. Several pieces were so heavy that Laura could feel the tractor protesting through the steering wheel. Each one received a number. Photographs, measurements, condition notes. Earl had told her that if she wanted buyers to treat the wood like inventory, she had to treat it like inventory first. By the end of the week, the equipment barn looked nothing like it had before. Rows of ugly maple masses stood elevated on blocks. Laura built a spreadsheet. Diameter. Approximate weight. cracks, condition, moisture concerns, potential use. She almost laughed when she looked at it. 6 months earlier, she had barely been keeping track of farm repairs. Now she was managing a catalog of giant wooden growths. But the joking stopped whenever she saw the rain outside. Inventory could become compost. Earl came over with end-grain sealer. Together they coated exposed surfaces and repositioned pieces where water could collect. Then they returned for B-38. Even with Tom's winch, it resisted them. The cable tightened. Mud churned. The Burl moved 6 inches. Stopped. They reset. Tried again. After nearly an hour, the massive piece finally rolled free. Tom whistled. That thing is a monster. They washed away enough mud to examine the bark. Earl circled it once, then twice. Laura noticed. What? Nothing yet. You always say nothing when you see something, Earl smiled faintly. The burl was covered in unusually dense clusters beneath the bark. Laura picked up chalk. Where do we cut? Earl's hand shot out. We don't. Laura stared at him. What? He placed his palm against B-38. If this is what I think it might be, the most expensive thing you could do is cut it before knowing who wants it. Laura looked at the hulking burl. For 2 weeks, she had been terrified the rain would destroy her wood, before she could cut it. Now Earl was telling her something even stranger. One piece might be too valuable to touch. For 4 days, B-38 sat untouched in the driest corner of Laura's barn. Every time she passed it, she wanted to know what was inside. Earl refused. Instead, he photographed the burl from every angle and contacted craftsmen he trusted. The first wanted measurements. The second asked about slab potential. The third called Laura directly. Michael Grant had worked with figured maple for more than 20 years. I want to see it before anybody cuts it. 2 days later, Michael arrived from Tennessee. He entered the barn, saw B-38, and slowed. Laura knew that look now. He examined the bark. Growth pattern, natural openings, dense clusters. He used a flashlight to look inside small voids. How long since the tree was cut? Laura answered. Dry since you moved it? Yes. Michael walked around it again. Then, finally, what do you want? I don't know. Michael smiled. That makes 2 of us. He continued inspecting. Then he stood. 8,000. Laura felt a pressure in her chest. 8,000 for one burl. Her mind immediately began spending the money against problems she had stopped believing she could solve. Tractor transmission, roof, taxes. For several seconds, Laura wanted to say yes before Michael could change his mind. Then she looked at Earl. He said nothing. Michael noticed. Real offer. Deposit today. Laura swallowed. Earl finally spoke. Give her until tomorrow. After Michael left, Laura rounded on him. You think it's worth more? I think we still don't know what it's worth. That answer frustrated her. $8,000 was not theoretical to Laura. It was relief. Earl suggested they expose the burl to more than one buyer without cutting it. Photographs and measurements went into a private group of professional craftsmen and specialty wood buyers. The responses started within hours. $8,500. $9,200 if solid. $9,500 plus freight. Then $10,000. Laura sat at her kitchen table refreshing the screen. The amounts no longer felt connected to the ugly object in her barn. Then Michael called. I saw the post. Laura waited. 12,000. Silence. As is, he said. I arrange pickup. You don't cut anything. Laura looked through the kitchen window toward the barn. Why? Michael took a moment before answering. Because I've spent 20 years looking for material people can't manufacture. That was the sentence that decided it. Factories could make boards identical. They could stain ordinary maple. They could laminate veneer. But nobody could order nature to recreate whatever might be hidden inside B-38. Laura accepted. 3 days later, Michael's trailer pulled away carrying the burl. Laura remained beside the driveway with a receipt in her hand. $12,000. Tom stared after the trailer. They left that thing in the mud? Laura nodded. She wanted to laugh. Instead, she felt tears unexpectedly sting her eyes. Not because she had become rich. She had not. But for the first time in 2 years, a large number on a piece of paper meant money coming toward the farm instead of leaving it. Then the story escaped her control. Photographs of B-38 spread beyond Earl's original group. Messages arrived from woodworkers, then dealers, then buyers asking about the rest of the inventory. And someone recognized the property. The following Monday, Laura heard tires on gravel. A white company truck entered the driveway. Rick Holloway stepped out, the same man who had called the Burls junk. This time he was not laughing. "We need to talk about those Burls." Laura folded her arms. "What about them?" Rick looked toward the barn. "Those were part of our timber." Laura felt the $12,000 receipt suddenly grow very heavy in her pocket. Rick had brought someone with him. The second man introduced himself as Mark Ellison, operations manager for the timber company. He carried a leather folder. Laura immediately understood. This was not a conversation. It was a claim. Mark looked toward the barn. "We've become aware that material removed during our harvest is being sold." Laura stared at him. "Removed?" She pointed toward the clearing. "You left it in the mud." Rick shifted. Mark opened the folder. "Our agreement covered maple timber harvested from this property. Those burls were attached to trees included in that transaction." Laura felt cold, despite the warm afternoon. For weeks, she had worried about rot, cracking, moisture, bad cuts. Not once had she seriously worried that someone would claim the wood after abandoning it. "You told me to keep them." She looked directly at Rick. Rick avoided her eyes. "I don't remember the exact wording." The answer hit harder than Laura expected. She could still see him leaning out of the truck window. "Keep them if you want." She remembered because at the time the words had been meaningless. Now Rick was acting as though they might never have been spoken. Mark continued. "We're asking you to stop further sales until ownership is resolved." Then he mentioned B-38. The $12,000. Laura's stomach dropped. They knew the exact amount. If that material belongs to the company, proceeds from previous sales may also belong to the company. Laura heard the sentence but for a moment could not respond. The tractor, the roof, the taxes, every problem that money had begun to solve suddenly seemed to reopen. "You called them junk." Rick stared toward the driveway. "I said we weren't hauling them." "You said I could keep them." "I don't remember." Laura's anger almost overpowered her fear. When the Burls were ugly, the company had not wanted to spend diesel on them. When Laura dragged them out of mud, cataloged them, protected them, found buyers, and discovered their value, suddenly everyone wanted to discuss contracts. Mark handed her a letter. "Have your attorney review this." Then they left. Laura stood in the driveway until the truck disappeared. Inside her barn sat more than 100 numbered pieces of figured maple. Yesterday, they had looked like opportunity. Now they looked like evidence. That evening, Laura spread every document from the timber sale across the kitchen table. Contracts, maps, payment records, harvest specifications. She read until the words blurred. Past midnight, she poured cold coffee into the sink and looked at the empty chair that had once belonged to her husband. For one irrational moment, she wanted him there simply to tell her whether she had made some terrible mistake. Instead, there was only paper and silence. The next morning, Laura called Earl. "I'm stopping sales." He listened, then asked one question. "What does the contract say they bought?" "Timber." "Exactly what timber?" Laura looked down at the pages. She did not know. A local attorney admitted timber contracts were outside his specialty and referred her to an independent consulting forester. That led Laura to Samuel Price. 30 years in timber evaluation and harvest disputes. Samuel arrived 2 days later. Before reading the contract, he walked the property. Stumps, slash, skid trails, remaining burls. Then he sat at Laura's kitchen table and read silently. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Laura could hear the refrigerator cycling behind him. Finally, Samuel stopped. There. He turned the agreement. The contract defined harvestable material as merchantable, saw logs meeting specific size and quality standards. Laura leaned closer. "What does that mean for the Burls?" Samuel did not give her the answer she desperately wanted. "It means we need to look at how the contract treated them and how the company treated them." They searched the documents. There were provisions for tops, branches, cleanup, damaged trees, but nothing Laura could find explicitly identifying the discarded burl masses. Samuel asked. Were the burls inventoried? No. Scaled? No. Listed separately? No. Did they pay you based on their value? Laura shook her head. Samuel leaned back. That matters. He explained that the company's own crew appeared to have separated the burls from merchantable saw logs and treated them as residue. Then there was Rick's statement. Keep them if you want. Not perfect evidence, but not meaningless either. Laura gripped the edge of the table. Do they own them? Samuel chose his words carefully. I'm saying the letter they sent you looks more confident than the paperwork I'm reading. For the first time since the company truck returned, Laura took a full breath. The fear did not disappear, but something else returned. Fight. If the company wanted the burls now, Laura would make them show exactly where the contract said they had bought them. Samuel returned the next morning carrying a camera and yellow legal pad. Don't move anything. For 3 hours he documented the harvested woods, stumps, skid trails, slash piles, depressions where burls had originally lain. Laura walked beside him, reconstructing the harvest piece by piece. Some burls had been removed from usable trunks. Others came from irregular lower sections rejected by the crew. Several had been pushed aside with branches. Back inside, Samuel examined the original timber tally. Merchantable timber had measurements, estimates, records. The burls had none. No count, no weight, no individual value. Nothing showing the company had paid for 193 burl masses as separate merchantable products. Samuel tapped the phrase again. Merchantable saw logs. That's the center. Still, he would not promise Laura she had won anything. Contracts could be argued, memories challenged, intent disputed. He helped organize the facts, but insisted an attorney review the response. Laura appreciated his caution. She also hated it. For days, she woke expecting another white truck. Every sound on the gravel made her look outside. Business stopped. Buyers waited. The barn was full of wood she was afraid to sell. 3 days later, her attorney sent the company a formal response. Identify the exact provision transferring ownership of discarded burls. Provide the inventory, the scaling record, the valuation, any evidence they had been included in the company's purchase. Then Laura waited. 1 week. Nothing. 2 weeks. Still nothing. Silence did not comfort her. It gave her imagination more room. Maybe lawyers were preparing something larger. Maybe the company was calculating every sale. Maybe the $12,000 would disappear. Then a letter arrived. Laura opened it, standing beside the mailbox. The company provided no burl inventory, no separate valuation, no provision specifically identifying discarded burl masses. Instead, it offered a settlement. Laura read the number twice. 25% of all future burl sales. In exchange, the company would withdraw its ownership claim. She called Samuel. They want 25%. A pause. Then Samuel said, That tells you something. What? If they were absolutely certain all of it was theirs, why ask you for 25? Laura sat down slowly. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not because the dispute was over, because she finally understood the balance had shifted. Her attorney rejected the settlement. The final response stated that Laura considered the abandoned residual material hers, unless the company could demonstrate otherwise under the contract. Then came another wait. No lawsuit, no truck, no additional demand. Weeks became months. The burls remained in Laura's barn, but Laura had changed. The dispute frightened her because it exposed how casually the entire business had begun. A stranger by the road. A verbal conversation. A few sales. A notebook. No formal grading system. No consistent paperwork. No clear sales process. She had almost built something valuable on top of assumptions. That would not happen again. Laura stopped selling whole burls. Earl stared at her. You have buyers calling every week. I know. And you're going to say no? For now. She walked along the numbered rows until she reached B67. A month earlier, $500 for the whole thing would have sounded wonderful. Now she understood that the buyer might cut it into slabs, blanks, scales, and dozens of smaller products worth far more. The logging company had built its business on speed. Laura realized her advantage was patience. So she bought a used moisture meter, found a second-hand bandsaw, converted more of the barn into drying space. Then she opened a fresh notebook. Across the first page she wrote, "Stop selling logs." She stared at the words for a moment. Then underneath, "Start selling value." Laura's first investment after the dispute cost $65. A used moisture meter. It was not impressive. It did not make the farm look successful, but Earl approved. If you don't understand moisture, you don't understand what you're selling, so Laura learned. Not because she wanted to become a wood scientist, because she had finally understood that every mistake between Burl and buyer came out of her pocket. The dry side of the equipment barn became storage. Laura built simple racks from lumber already on the farm. Slabs were stacked with spacers for air circulation. Each piece kept the identity of the burl it came from. B067A, B067B, B067C. Cutting date, dimensions, defects, moisture. Nothing depended on memory anymore. Then she and Earl opened B67. The first cut revealed dense clusters of eyes. Laura immediately pictured another expensive furniture slab. Earl stopped her. "Look at the shape." The burl was too irregular. Trying to force wide slabs from it would waste much of the figured maple. Earl marked thick sections instead, bowl blanks. The smaller pieces became potential knife scales. Pen blanks, boxes, instrument pieces. Laura stared at material she once would have thrown into a fire. That was the moment the business model finally became clear. The goal was not to find the biggest buyer. It was to find the right buyer for every part. Large, exceptional sections went toward furniture, thick figured blocks toward woodturners, small, highly figured pieces toward makers who needed only inches of rare grain. Damaged, low-figure material became low-value product. Very little went to waste. Then, Laura faced the hardest question: price. She kept asking Earl what a piece was worth. Finally, he answered with a question. To whom? That changed everything. A knife maker and furniture builder could look at the same block and see completely different value. Laura stopped guessing at use whenever possible. Instead, she photographed each premium piece carefully, both faces, accurate measurements, moisture, visible defects. Then buyers made their own decisions. The first sales from B67 came gradually. Turning blanks, $320. Knife scale blocks, $180. One furniture slab, $1,100. More pieces sold afterward. Laura added the totals. $2,000. Then $2,400. Eventually, more than $3,000 in gross sales came from one burl. Laura stared at the spreadsheet. Months earlier, she might have sold the entire thing for $500 and felt lucky. That evening, she walked through the barn alone. Rows of numbered maples surrounded her, some whole, some freshly cut, some slowly drying. None looked like trash anymore. Laura finally understood why the logging company had missed the opportunity without necessarily making a mistake. They needed uniform timber. Their machines rewarded straight lines. Their economics rewarded speed. Laura's customers wanted exactly what that system rejected: irregularity, unpredictability, one-of-a-kind figure. And standing in the barn, Laura realized the larger opportunity was not the 193 burls. Those would eventually disappear. The real opportunity was knowing what to look for, after everyone else had already decided something was worthless. By the following spring, half of Laura's equipment barn had become Bennett figured maple. The name started because she needed something to print on invoices. Then buyers began remembering it. Premium slabs filled drying racks. Turning blanks sat on labeled shelves. Small figured pieces were sorted by dimensions and quality. Laura photographed the best material individually, instead of showing buyers a pile of wood and asking them to guess. Both faces, dimensions, moisture where relevant, defects plainly visible. She had learned that hiding a flaw might win one sale. Showing it could win a customer. Daniel Mercer returned. A Nashville guitar builder ordered highly figured maple. Knife makers bought blocks Laura once would have burned. Woodturners ordered blanks in batches. One sculptor drove almost 500 miles to choose an irregular section in person. Eventually, Laura hired Tom's nephew, Caleb, 2 days a week to help move heavy material. Jennifer, a local mother, helped pack orders during busy weeks. The company was still small. Laura liked that. Small meant she could still know the material, still know the buyers, still stop when a strange piece demanded attention. One afternoon, someone offered $4,000 for unopened B112. Laura stared at the offer. A year earlier, she would have accepted before the buyer finished the sentence. Instead, she pulled up the records, photographs, measurements, notes. Then she declined. 6 months later, they carefully opened part of B112. Exceptional figure appeared across several wide sections. The first slab sold for $2,700, the second for $2,300. Turning blanks added hundreds. Smaller craft pieces kept selling afterward. Laura thought about the $4,000 offer. It had not been a bad offer. It had simply arrived before she understood what she owned. Not every decision worked that way. B129 looked promising and opened into rot. B143 showed insect damage. Another beautiful slab split during drying despite everything Laura had learned. Those losses hurt. Sometimes Laura stood over damaged wood and imagined the money it might have become. But disappointment also disciplined her. She stopped believing every Burl contained a fortune. The business worked because enough extraordinary pieces paid for the ordinary failures. By summer, Laura installed better lighting, added racks, upgraded the saw. Then something happened that mattered more to her than any individual sale. The property tax bill arrived. Laura opened it at the kitchen table. For 2 years, that envelope had made her stomach tighten. This time she paid it. No shifting money from another overdue bill. No waiting until the final week. No calculation about what could survive being late. Just paid. Next came the shed roof. Then the tractor transmission. Laura kept those receipts beside the original timber contract. Sometimes she opened the drawer and looked at them together. Straight maple had left her property on logging trucks. The wood nobody wanted had repaired what remained. But as the rows of whole burls slowly shrank, Laura saw a problem coming. There had been 193. Eventually, there would be 0. If Bennett figured maple depended entirely on one accidental discovery, it was not a business. It was a countdown. Laura needed another source. Fortunately, after a year of learning what everyone else ignored, she knew exactly who to call. 2 years after the logging trucks left, only 17 of Laura Bennett's original 193 burls remained unprocessed. Yet the barn was fuller than ever. Laura had started calling tree services, small logging crews, orchard owners, sawmills, landowners clearing pasture. Her request was simple. Before unusual maple went into a burn pile or was left beside a logging road, call Bennett figured maple. At first, people laughed. Then Laura started writing checks. A tree service saved a massive burl from a storm-damaged maple. A sawmill stacked irregular sections it once would have discarded. A landowner called before burning debris from a clearing project. Laura no longer waited for valuable wood to appear on her farm. She had built a network that noticed it for her. Bennett figured maple stayed small, deliberately. Laura had no desire to become an industrial lumber company. They made money moving predictable material quickly. She made money stopping when something looked strange. Earl still came around. He was 70 and had announced his retirement several times. Nobody took it seriously. One afternoon, he arrived carrying a wooden bowl. Laura saw the grain and knew immediately. The first one. Earl smiled. The bowl had come from the small burl Laura had brought to his workshop. After refusing his $50 offer, the outside was smooth, simple. Inside, hundreds of eyes swirled through golden maple. Laura ran a finger around the rim. You really tried to buy this for $50. I did. You knew. I knew it might be interesting. Laura raised an eyebrow. That isn't what you told me. Earl laughed. I was hoping you wouldn't ask many questions. Laura laughed too. Then the barn grew quiet. She carried the bowl outside. Beyond the equipment shed, the woods were healing. Grass covered the old skid trails. Young maples filled openings created by the harvest. The clearing where 193 burls had once lain in mud was difficult to recognize. Laura remembered standing there after the logging crew left. Rick beside his truck. Not worth the diesel. Keep them if you want. For a long time, Laura had thought the lesson was that Rick had been wrong. Now she understood it differently. Rick had been right about their value to his company. The Burls were terrible industrial timber. Heavy, irregular, slow to process, difficult to transport. His company was designed to extract value from straight logs. It had no reason to spend time discovering what was hidden inside twisted ones. Earl saw bowl blanks. Daniel saw furniture. Knife makers saw tiny figured blocks. Instrument builders saw grain orientation. Laura eventually saw something else. Time. The Burls gave her time when the farm was running out of it. They repaired the tractor, fixed the roof, paid taxes. More importantly, they gave Laura something she had not realized she had lost after her husband's death. The feeling that the future might contain more than bills she could barely pay. Not every Burl had been valuable. Some rotted, some cracked, some barely paid for the labor involved. But enough were extraordinary, and Laura had learned how to keep more of that value by understanding the material before selling it. Before sunset, she returned to the barn. 17 original Burls remained against the back wall. Laura walked toward one. B-193, the last number from her original inventory. She could have sold it months ago. She never did. Not because anyone had proven it was exceptional. Not because she expected it to be worth thousands. She kept it because she remembered exactly how little it had once seemed to matter. 200 ugly pieces of wood had been left behind because nobody wanted them enough to haul them away. One stranger stopped. One offer made Laura suspicious. One cut revealed what the bark had hidden. Laura placed her hand against B-193. For most of her life, she had assumed value was obvious. Good timber looked good. Bad timber looked bad. Success meant owning what everybody wanted. The last 2 years had taught her something different. Sometimes the most valuable thing left on a piece of land isn't what everyone fights to take. Sometimes it's the thing everyone else already decided wasn't worth carrying away.